What is up, Bitcoiners? I just got off with Amanda Cavaleri. This was a really fantastic conversation. We kind of focused on who is Amanda. Amanda is running a fund over in Wyoming, but she's also heavily involved in all things that's around Bitcoin and making Bitcoin as attainable and as understandable and palatable to legislators as possible. She actually moved to Wyoming just because Wyoming was a leader in the Bitcoin and the crypto legislation space. She's working with miners. She's working with politicians. She's an overall fantastic advocate for Bitcoin, and she is all about Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. She is a true Bitcoiner, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her in person over in BTC Miami, over at the beefsteak, the legendary beefsteak. So y'all, if you're in Wyoming, hit up Amanda. If you know anything about this infrastructure bill and you want to learn more how to react to it, this podcast is going to help you with some really great advice, as well as just help you understand how Bitcoin is fitting into the global equation. Amanda is really wise. She's, kind of explored the world. She's met with different stakeholders in this industry, and she understands where Bitcoin is going. And, I think that she has a good sense of, what can help Bitcoin, at least in the immediate term, but hopefully in the long term. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this podcast, and that's enough of me. Let's just get right into it. Bitcoiners, I am getting on with Amanda Cavaleri, the COO of Pearl Snap Capital. She is an amazing Bitcoiner, someone that I got to meet in person in Miami and have really enjoyed just following her on social media. And then last week with this kind of bill, this infrastructure bill in the U.S. Senate, she was one of the people that was really kind of leading the rally cry around like how to actually interface with your representative. I feel like a lot of Bitcoiners are very like, I don't want to talk to my representative. I don't want to vote and all this stuff. And now with this infrastructure bill, we kind of have to make some noise because there's this impending, potential bad legislation. And you really kind of stepped up with a lot of leadership there. And then you and Joe, I can't pronounce his last name, Carlosar. I am the worst with names.
I'll let you do this. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Carlosari. I think that's all right.
Close. Yeah.
Joe Carlosari, if you're listening to this, forgive me. I'm sorry. But yeah, you two co-authored an article kind of teasing out different aspects and again, calling on Bitcoiners to just interface and try to make their voices heard. Amanda, welcome to the podcast. I know that was a pretty long intro, but I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, excited to be here. And I don't think I did much. I just happened to have had some experience in DC at a fellowship out there. So you kind of start to learn the ins and outs of it, and being noisy and voicing your opinion actually can do something. So it's really interesting to see how we went from there's no way there will be an amendment to this bill to now there is an amendment to at least clarify some of the language.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can dive into like the specifics around the current situation. But before doing that, I just kind of want to like learn a little bit more about Amanda. I'm sure the Bitcoiners out there, some of them may be familiar with you. Some of them, you may be a new person, a new voice. So I guess let's just jump into that. Like, who is Amanda? How did you discover Bitcoin? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's been a fun journey. I first heard about Bitcoin. I dropped out of college after my sophomore year, started a business, and had shared office space with this guy who was he went to MIT. He had real estate background, like a really interesting human being. And he told me about Bitcoin in 2010. He's pretty early. I think the way he explained it, it seemed like he was explaining it in a very peer-to-peer community way, and it just didn't resonate with me. It wasn't until I started traveling abroad, researching actually health and longevity and aging, that I started to get these macro perspectives that have, to me, Bitcoin really encapsulates. So started working in this world through privacy initially. So I was working in healthcare, specifically around, tools to help older adults maintain their independence in their homes and longevity. And older people actually care about their privacy. So I ended up working with David Chaum. If you're not familiar with David Chaum, he's kind of an OG in this space. So he helped developed the concept of blockchain in the late 70s, early 80s. And then he also ran DigiCash, which was the first digital currency. So got to work with him on privacy and learned a
That's
ton
pretty
through
epic.
that route. Yeah. Yeah, it was wild. It was like drinking from a fire hose, right? And so, yeah, we traveled a lot internationally and just got to see behind the curtain a little bit of some of the crypto stuff. And to me, there's a big difference between Bitcoin and all the altcoins, not just
What year
philosophically,
was
but
this? Just
also,
to put things into perspective, into
I don't remember if
context.
it was 2017 or 2018, somewhere in there.
I'm
Sorry,
I
time's
remember
flying right now.
summer 2018. I met David Chom at Distributed 2018, where I
Okay.
escorted him from his hotel to the backstage
Yeah.
area. So I remember that was kind of like a keystone moment in my crypto career, kind of getting into Bitcoin too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's a genius. I think it was pretty incredible to work with him and just understand how his brain works. But he saw a lot of these things that are coming down the pipeline now, as far as surveillance and all of that. Gosh, I mean, he was writing about it in the 80s and 90s. So he's way ahead of the curve. He saw this coming.
So I wanna dive into like you differentiating altcoins and Bitcoin, I guess 2017,
Yeah.
2018. I also want to talk about like maybe you and David Chom's differentiating perspectives because as far as I know, I don't know if he's still working on an altcoin project, but he never fully was like gave into Bitcoin, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, right? This is a loaded question. Nice work. But I think, it's got to be hard being like the godfather of this in so many ways and it moving forward without you. But he was working on really amazing things while Bitcoin was getting started. He was working on voting. Um, so, that work could be just as important in the future as well, potentially. But yeah, I for me, it was not necessarily, him. It was just seeing behind the curtains of how the fund structure worked and how it worked internationally and how, the pre-mining works and pre-sale. And it just felt really icky. The only other time I felt like that kind of cringy was living and working in DC. So it was helpful to see how it all worked. But again, it's not, truly most of it's a scam, a lot of securities really at the end of the day. And then I don't think you can replicate Bitcoin. I mean, it's like an immaculate conception. You have pure open source, it's purely distributed. It's a really interesting dynamic. So beyond the hard cap of 21 million, um, those are things that really interest me and the censorship resistance as well, especially working abroad. I think that's really important. I spend a lot of time in Hong Kong and just seeing what happened there really kind of pushed me over any ledge that I was maybe tilting over.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got when I started at BTC Inc. in 2018,
Yeah.
before meeting David Chom, I was actually traveling throughout Asia working remotely for BTC Inc. And I got the pleasure of being in Hong Kong in 2018. And there was tension, there's anger towards, government buildings and against, the mainlanders and resentment and stuff like that. But at the same time, like Hong Kong was still free and man, was it an amazing city.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that was so much fun. So it really does bring like a tear to my eye to just like think of, maybe Hong Kong as we knew it before is no longer a thing.
Yeah. It was my favorite city in the world and was because I don't think it can ever be what it was. And I don't think it'll adapt into anything resembling what it was, which is really unfortunate. I mean, I was there during some of, permitted protests. There were millions of people in the street. And I think COVID just kind of killed any global attention that they had. Um, Really, it would have been the UK's position to stand up for Hong Kong more, and they just weren't. We abandoned Hong Kong, in my perspective.
Well, I mean, we don't need to talk about Hong Kong more,
Yeah,
but again, it sounds like dropped out of college, found your way into working with David Chom, so I'm sure there's a crazy story on how that got started. Started to see the difference between Bitcoin and altcoins. What happened next?
Yeah. So then I moved to Wyoming after I stopped working with Chom a few years ago. So almost what, 2.5 years ago or so, because Wyoming has the most supportive legislation around Bitcoin and digital assets and fintech in general. So to me, it was just a really interesting place to be at that time. And it still is, right? They're still leading the way in the US in a lot of ways, internationally as well. And it's just been a really fascinating journey. So what I was doing is I kind of had like life figured out, I thought, right? Like everyone, I was consulting with funds and helping them get off the ground. So like a Bitcoin ETF style fund, hedge fund, a bunch of different models. And I'd come home to Wyoming, ski for a couple months or hike for a couple months, and then like go abroad for a little bit, come back. And so I was like, oh, I got this life. And then COVID, right? So stopped going. In my last trip abroad was in December, just before COVID, because all Asia just kind of shut down in January, February. So I didn't want to go back and get stuck. So I started trying to find ways that I could be more connected in Wyoming and domestically, and just really start getting involved back again with the community, the Bitcoin community. And so learned a ton, like drinking from a fire hose again. And it was so strange because it was all remote. And so I think now where we are on the legislation side, it's been pretty cool to be, living in the state that Lummis is in, and really pushing this initiative forward in DC. And her staff that she brought on they were some of the people that the legislation that was written for Wyoming was written on their laptop. So it's pretty cool that she really did embrace Bitcoin and this mission and moving it forward.
I mean, it's exciting to kind of hear like how Bitcoin is trickling into our government, because I feel like my favorite quote about Bitcoin is a Bitcoin Tina quote. And I know people have their opinions about Tina, but I love Tina. And he has many wise things to say, in my opinion. And one of the wisest is Bitcoin is like water. You can't stop it and it gets everywhere. So like, of course, like you can't stop it and it's going to get into every crevice of society, and
Right.
probably, transform it from inside out. So I think that this is just another example of that.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and that's where, once I really went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you see it everywhere. Like, oh, it can solve, you know, inflation in other countries. It can solve human rights issues. It can also solve very basic things like bank fees. So it just runs the spectrum. And I think for me, that's what's so fascinating, is kind of more of that macro perspective. And so I'm glad that I remained kind of open minded. I love Tina, like I do, but I'll tell you, like Bitcoin Twitter scares still kind of scares me, right, in a way. But when I was new to this space, I was like, what is up with what is up with this group of people? But now that I've gotten to know so many folks personally, like Bitcoin Tina or Hodl or some of those folks, it's like, oh, okay, you it really is. Now I understand what Michael Saylor said about the immune system and the what does he call it? The wise wasp, right? Because we went through some things in our own ways.
No, totally. I think the OG Bitcoiners definitely been through some things, and even 2017 Bitcoiners have been through some things. Yeah, I love the Bitcoin community personally. I think
Yeah.
Bitcoin Twitter is great. It is a wealth of knowledge, and I honestly think like Bitcoin is a subculture that is just so like it's just so difficult to ignore. It's like one of the most in your face subcultures out there, and I think like again going back to this bill, like I don't think these
Yeah.
senators and the Treasury and the White House thought that they were going to get pushback. They're like, we're going to put together this fucking 20-page document bill that no one's going to read all the way through. and we're going to sneak in all these little things that we want to get done, and
Yeah.
land grab while we can. And little did they know that Bitcoiners verify everything that this leaked, and then we're blowing up every senator possible, making an enormous amount of noise. Again, just can't be ignored. Like even pundits on CNBC know what a Bitcoin maximalist is.
Yeah,
Like it's just like this is a tour de force of people. It's insane.
it is insane. And I think that's part of this point, right? There are 46 million Americans that own Bitcoin. It could be somewhere 40 to 50 now. Who knows what the exact number is, but around 46 million. And that's 17% of the US population. So when you start to look at the innovation bell curve, right, you have the innovators and the early adopters. And so that's, 15%. We're at 17%. So maybe we've even crossed the chasm without really realizing it. And I think this infrastructure bill, it's crazy. It's 2,702 pages, a few pages dedicated to, cryptocurrency tax and surveillance. And yeah, it was just snuck in there. It was created kind of behind closed doors, no committee, no, you know, no input from the industry, and they just put it in there. And I think you're absolutely right. I don't think they were expecting a group of there we go cyber hornets to come and make our voices heard, not just on Twitter, but we've been calling. So, I called my senator today, and they just said the phone has been ringing off the hook specifically about this amendment that's being proposed by Lummis and a couple other senators. So that's, that's a lot of progress. On Sunday, we were thinking nothing can be done. It's written in stone. And now, we stirred the pot enough to actually get some momentum on this. So really proud to be part of this community that actually bands together um, and made our voices heard. That's they represent us.
So where do we go from here? From like, let's just call it Bitcoiners and political action. And I apologize to the international Bitcoiners that with a lot of this conversation around the infrastructure bill is U.S. oriented, but here we are. Both big U.S. based Bitcoiners, so we kind of have to talk about it. But from like, let's just call it a U.S. as well as in general, like where do we go from here in terms of um, political action, advocating for Bitcoin, being like a single issue voter block that just starts to like push its weight? I'm just kind of curious what your vision is.
Yeah, and I think that you hit the nail on the head. We're single issue voter block, and that so basically that means that we'll go with the politicians that are pro Bitcoin and against the ones that aren't, right? And I think we're at that stage where that's where millions, maybe even tens of millions of Bitcoiners are, or they're getting there. So if we have 46 million Bitcoiners, that's 46 million that are adults. Those are 46 million US voters. If you look at it, compare it to other organizations in DC that are big and scary to representatives, like let's take AARP, for example. AARP has, in 2018, they had 38 million members. I'm not sure what the number is now. And they're one of the most terrifying forces on the Hill because AARP members are older, so they tend to vote, but they also control a lot of the wealth in the US. So if they were their own country, the 50 plus population in the US would be the third largest GDP in the world, behind the US and China. So if we can start to tell that story and create, I think it's okay to open source, and some Bitcoiners won't want to do this, but some will want more, organization. Maybe it's a C4, maybe it's a pack, maybe it's multiple of these things coming together and making our voices heard, because I don't think this is over. Even for this infrastructure bill, I think we still need to bring this to the House. So most importantly, we need to start reaching out to our House of Representatives, if you're in their districts, and start teaching them like immediately about Bitcoin. And then you build those relationships. And when these things come around, you've already got that relationship established and can explain, why does this hurt your livelihood or your business or anything that you're involved with? And I think that's really important, to have that relationship. And it's not just this infrastructure bill. We have more things will come as well. So I think this is just getting started, and just getting organized and being prepared and not caught off guard like we were on this one.
All right, Bitcoiners, I want to tell you about our newest sponsor. This show is brought to you by Ledin.io. I have been super, super impressed with the guys over at Ledin. I've actually known the co-founders, Adam and Mauricio, for a very long time. I've had the pleasure to watch them build Ledin up from a tiny, tiny startup to now a super impressive institutional grade Bitcoin and crypto lender. Y'all, I'm so impressed with these guys. They are offering some of the best rates out there. I don't think anyone even comes close to touching them. You can get 6.1% APY on your first 2 Bitcoin that you deposit into Ledin interest accounts, and you can get 8.5% US on USDC deposits. I mean, I know all the competitors, they're not even close. If you're going to put your crypto and your Bitcoin into an interest account, Ledin is by far the best. And on top of that, like I said, these guys are hardcore Bitcoiners and they know the products and the services that Bitcoiners want and appreciate. They came up with B2X. It allows you to put your Bitcoin in, they leverage it up, and you can, with one click of the mouse, get twice the exposure to Bitcoin. So if you're super bullish, Ledin has you covered with a super, super easy way to get leverage with B2X. And then on top of that, they know that Bitcoiners care about your reserves. They know that Bitcoiners don't like under reserved and not full reserved financial institutions. So they are pushing the frontier in transparency in the digital asset lending space. And they are the first digital asset lender to do a full proof of reserves and proof of attestation through a Mariano LLC, a public accounting firm. So the Ledin guys, they know what Bitcoiners like. They are legit. I encourage you guys to check them out. Do your own research and go to Ledin.io. That is LEDN.io and learn more. Bitcoiners, I want to tell you guys about The Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is a new premium newsletter from the Bitcoin Magazine team in conjunction with my man, BTCization, Dylan LeClaire. Dylan is such a multifaceted and wide-ranging analyst. He does everything from on-chain analytics to macro analysis to hash rate and all that kind of good stuff. He does it all. He breaks down everything that's happening every single day with his daily dive. He's going to dive into what is happening in the market that day. So that way you don't have to pay attention to Twitter. You don't have to pay attention to anything else. You can just pay attention to the deep dive and he has you covered. And at the end of the week, guess what? You get a weekly recap. And at the end of the month, hey, we have a freaking report, a beautiful PDF breaking down all the activity of that entire month, what it means for Bitcoin, what you can expect moving forward. The Bitcoin market is going to moon. We are here to make sure that we maximize your stack. Go to members.bitcoinmagazine.com to sign up today. And if you use promo code BITS, you can get 1 month for free. So again, the deep dive, I've been checking it out every day and you should too. Back to the show. Yeah, I mean, I think you and David Bailey, the CEO of BTC Inc., need to have a talk about this Bitcoin pack because I think he's been very interested in something along those lines as well. In terms of like, let's just say being more on the offensive, organizing more, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the Bitcoin Mining Council because Sailor on one side saying we're just organizing like any other industry, professional industry group to create, some sort of professional council. You can look up every single thing. There is a professional council on it. Why not a mining council? And then on the flip side, you have, folks saying we should not bow down to any sort of like ESG narrative, that it's just a false narrative to begin with. And I kind of find myself agreeing with both. I don't want to bend down to an ESG or even frame it in ESG. And then on the flip side, I also think that we should fight, advocate, and educate. So I'm kind of curious what you think about that council in general, and like maybe even more specifically, how you think Bitcoiners ideally should kind of organize around this stuff beyond kind of like a pack and some of the stuff that you already suggested.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if a C4 or a pack or whatever is the right answer, if it's a combination of everything, right? And that's the great thing about open source. We can kind of do our own thing and don't have to commit to just one one way of doing it, right? And some people not participating might be their way of participating, and that's okay too. Um, the so with the Bitcoin Mining Council, I'm with you. Like, I'm torn. I think it's healthy that there is some friction between having the council and not. I think if every Bitcoiner were saying, "Oh, we love this council, we're totally on board," it could, spiral, or it could become something bigger than it was meant to be. But it's nice to have the Bitcoiners pushing back and saying, like, we don't know, this is not, this doesn't represent us, right? And that's great. That's open source. Um, I see some of the value in it. I think at the end of the day, we're not winning with energy innovation until we've got nuclear. And so it's like the nuclear thing, when you really study, different types of energy and what's the most beneficial in the long run, and efficient in the long run, it's nuclear again and again and again. So it's fascinating to me that we kind of did bow down to Musk. I feel like we did a little bit, or that group did. And, that's pretty frustrating for someone that's, what is it? Willie Woo had a quote today where if one of their models, was just sitting in a parking lot not being used, it would use more electricity than all of Bitcoin mining, right? So I think putting it in perspective is really important. But right now we're in such a polarized, reactionary, emotional world that's hard to put things in perspective sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is hard to put things in perspective. I guess, you know, my question is for you is like, you know, like what happens the rest of this year, right? Because I just think, we
Yeah.
have some battles, we have some headwinds. At the same time, there's just this unbelievable like undercurrent of bullishness. So, and a
Yeah.
lot of Bitcoiners, they kind of expect that a bull run will continue going into the later part of this year. I guess, like in your mind, like, you know, what happens next? Do things get clownier? I'm just kind of curious, like, how are you forecasting, 2021?
Yeah, so I think the rest of the year on the Hill in DC, we'll probably see more regulation coming for crypto, which is confusing for a lot of people on the Hill. What's the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, right? So I think education would be huge for all of us to just go out and teach one on one, even, right? And it's good for people to hear multiple messages in multiple ways. I didn't get the peer to peer thing in the beginning, but then I got the macro side, the international side years later, for example. So as far as what's coming, I think we'll see this go to the House. I hope this amendment passes. So keep calling and keep emailing your senators. I don't think it's interesting because Ted Cruz kind of went rogue, but Ted Cruz is also a very, polarizing figure in DC. I do not want a war personally between Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren on Bitcoin. That's just me. I don't think that's going to help us in the long run. I think there's a way that we can fight this in the House, but it has to start with education. So reach out to your senators today is what I would do. Send one more email, do one more call in the morning, try to get them to reconsider if they're pretty heavy. So at least there's a record that there are people that aren't for this. And then, the next thing would be go for the House, start teaching the House and start teaching your representatives about this and building a relationship and a bridge, because this is a long-term partnership. A lot of these kids that work on the Hill, they are kids. I mean, they've just graduated college or they're in grad school, or, some of them have debt. And they just, their friends are buying Dogecoin maybe. And so I think it's really important to be that person that reaches out and teaches, so that when these decisions are being made and they're helping to draft these bills, then they're able to have a bigger uh, understanding, a larger understanding for themselves as well. So I think that's what's next is the House for infrastructure, and then after that, we'll probably see another large bill where something gets put in at some point this year. I don't think it's over.
So I guess where do you think a lot of this animosity towards Bitcoin is coming from legislatively? Is this like, Congressman Warren on the Bitcoin Magazine podcast said that this is a big bank protection act or clause. Is this like because just trying to defend big banks? Like, do these senators feel or do these politicians feel threatened? Or on the flip side, do they just see this as a opportunity to collect more revenue and check some boxes in terms of getting stuff across the finish line? I'm just kind of curious what you think the general intention is here from the perpetrators of these legal attacks.
I think it might be all of the above and different for each person, right? And then some it might be as basic as not being a curious person and going down the rabbit hole, right? So maybe they just haven't gone down the rabbit hole yet, or they haven't seen a need to learn more. And that's where things like, you know, communicating become really important and teaching so that they have more and more of those opportunities, because it might take 8 touch points or 8 Bitcoiners calling, one staffer to get through to that staffer. And then that staffer starts explaining it to the others. And then that becomes a thing within their office. And so it's just, really, we understand the network effect. So let's leverage that, but let's focus on these policymakers. So then if they do keep having that animosity, then we know it's just not out of like being naive, right? I think that would help us answer a lot of questions as well.
Yep. I mean, that makes sense. And kind of like on that, so, you mentioned staffers. When people call into representatives, like they're not going to just go straight to the senator. I mean, maybe you can, but for the most part,
Maybe, yeah.
you're going to have, someone who's a member of their office and staff kind of handling it and, organizing and escalating things up, right? And taking notes for the senator. Can you just talk about like talking to those people? And you did mention, maybe they're young, maybe they have friends buying Dogecoin, that kind of thing. Like, maybe talk about even framing a little bit, because I feel like sometimes even myself, not so good as a Bitcoiner with framing, and sometimes talking about burning down the government to a young kid who's working for a liberal politician or a conservative politician, maybe they don't feel the same way about burning down the government.
Yeah, right. I think it's like always meeting people where they are or trying to understand where they are. So you can always ask, what's your understanding of this? And kind of just ask probative questions, right? Then you can ask, what's the senator or representative's understanding of this? And, what kind of feedback have you been getting from other people? And then you start to, take down some of that armor and you're having a person to person relationship. I always like to start with, for example, I still called Hickenlooper's office today, and he's Colorado. He's a senator in Colorado. And I said, I'm a fifth generation Coloradan. My family's been an entrepreneur, whether it's been farmland or healthcare in the state for five generations. And so it's like putting that in perspective and like, okay, we'll listen to you a little bit more. And I'm like, oh, where'd you grow up? And find out if they're from there in the first place. Right. And so it's just that kind of getting to know a person first and where they are first, and then starting to explain, how you see it and make it more of a conversation and a back and forth than preaching. I think that helps a lot. Sometimes also like psychologically, people remember or have a more favorable experience or memory of a conversation if they're talking more. So I'll probably love this conversation, CK, because I'm the one talking the whole time. But those are little tricks, right? And then you build that relationship and follow up with email and then touch base, sometimes just out of the blue touch base, right? Not because you need something.
That sounds like a lot of effort there, Amanda.
I know. It is.
Do we need to build relationships with our representative staffers to fight for Bitcoin? Is that what it takes?
It might be. I mean, or inviting them to meetups, right? Like get them to become a Bitcoiner. Why can't they become a Bitcoiner? So I think that's the goal, really. Like we would try to orange pill our friends or family or a certain industry or whatever. Same thing. So I think inviting them into the community is really helpful too.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that's a great idea. And maybe we should kick off a campaign called Orange Pill All the Staffers. If we orange pill all the staffers, then every single congressman or congresswoman and senator they have no choice. They're just going to have a bunch of, orange pilled Bitcoiners on their hands.
Exactly. I think that's the real Trojan horse, right? If you get all the staffers, or even if we got like 30% of the staffers, that's pretty good. I wouldn't be upset about that. That'd be an incredible feat, actually.
All right, Bitcoiners, you heard it here first. Orange pilling all the congressional staffers, all the staffers for every politician across the globe. All these politicians use staffers to help them make, and make do with the limited constraints and bandwidth that they have. I'm sure they have lots of lobbyists and stakeholders in their ears, so they need staffers, and we can orange pill all of them. Amanda, just kind of like getting away from like, the legal situation, as important as it is, I do find it tiring a little bit. I kind of want to talk about
Yeah.
like for you, like why is Bitcoin so important, right? Like why are you dedicating all
Yeah.
of your time? Why are you entering into this community and, and kind of diving headfirst into this? You even moved to Colorado because of Bitcoin. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
gosh, Wyoming
Wyoming. I know,
because of
from
Bitcoin. I'm
Colorado
sorry.
already.
Sorry. Yeah,
It
you're from
wasn't Wild
Colorado.
West enough for me anymore.
Yes, sorry. And I mean, I love Wyoming. I need to come visit once again, but yeah, I guess back to you.
Yeah, and if people are going to visit Wyoming, feel free to reach out on Twitter. Just send me a DM, and I'll try to connect you to things if I'm not in town at the same time. Even um, so, where does it come from? I think personally, right? I was a kid that always did the right thing. I got the good grades. I did everything right, and then I had this little like alter ego anti-authoritarian in me, and just never understood why. Like I'd always ask, well, why this, why that? And I think that's what's so intriguing about early Bitcoiners, especially, is the why is a big factor for all of us in everything. Well, why is the financial institution? Well, why is the government like this? Well, why do I have to follow that rule? Why can't I do it this way? And so for me, I think especially being an entrepreneur and constantly butting up against no, 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 I just didn't have another outlet for it. And then I found, a lot of Bitcoiners who are very similar in asking why and trying to find alternative routes around things. So one, the community, and personal frustration with systems, right, that just don't make sense anymore and archaic. So anything from healthcare to government, a lot of things don't make sense. And so that plus that more geopolitical angle, I see China as being a really big entrant, especially with payments. So WeChat and Alipay are kind of exploding in numbers. China trades with 70% of the world. They're trying to buy ports. I feel like there's this kind of encroaching, I don't know, this encroaching cloud that's coming for freedom in a way. And so I think the combination of, and this is kind of the discussion when I explain it to folks in DC, is Bitcoin plus the US dollar will beat the digital yuan. And I think that's the combination to me that makes the most sense, and that will make continue to allow the world to expand rather than retracting and going backwards. I spent a lot of time interviewing, like obsessed with wisdom. So I interview older adults around the world, including, you know, older adults from who lived through communism in Hungary, for example, and just hearing their stories, to me, that system doesn't make sense. I'm not saying capitalism's perfect and it's not hurting people in different ways either. But to me, what really makes sense is a Bitcoin future. And especially as the world is more global and we're able to communicate, information travels differently. I think that's the future that we're heading towards, is a truly free future, as an optimist. So I think Bitcoin gets us there.
All right, let's take a quick break from that episode. I want to tell you guys about our sponsor. It is Bitcoin 2022 conference. I am sure you saw the videos. You may have been there in person. Bitcoin 2021 was an absolute smashing success. It was the biggest conference in Bitcoin history, crypto history, whatever history of the digital asset sphere. Bitcoin is number one, and the Bitcoin 2021 conference is number one with a bullet. It was an absolutely incredible time. I was working my ass off the whole time, but I got to meet so many incredible community members. And I think the best testament to how amazing Bitcoin 2021 was not just all of the amazing, accolades and compliments that I got personally and our team got, but also it's the skin in the game in Bitcoin 2022. We have already sold close to 1,500 tickets. That is more than 10% of the people, everyone who went to Bitcoin 2021 have already purchased tickets to Bitcoin 2022. We have not released a date. We have not released a city. We have not released anything. That is the biggest compliment. That is the biggest skin in the game of the community being down for this conference. Bitcoin 2022 is going to be bigger than Bitcoin 2021. It's going to be better than Bitcoin 21 in every single way. And we are going to be bringing you the best opportunity to mingle with the biggest, the baddest, the most Bitcoin people on the planet. So join the revolution. Go to b.tc/conference. Get your tickets today. I don't know what the ticket prices are. They are going up. I think they're $249 right now. We just rolled out fiat ticket purchases. All the tickets purchased before today were all purchased in BTC. So get it, guys. Get it. Get this ticket. Be at Bitcoin 2022. See you there. Yeah, so I mean, I definitely like that pitch, right? Which is like, freedom and Bitcoin are synonymous, and the alternative is the authoritarian, totalitarian kind of panopticon, digital panopticon, and that's absolutely like China's not even like pretending that that's not what they're trying to do, right? That's
Yeah.
what they're trying to do, and they're flexing their muscles even today, like earlier this week and last week banning games and limiting video games, calling it spiritual opium, other sorts of constraints, other slaps on quickly growing financial companies within their borders. They're trying to control everyone and scale that control with technology, and that's the opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin scales human freedom with technology. So it is the 180. And if you stand for freedom, you can't stand for the digital panopticon.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think as we do enter, global, digital currencies is form of, from these central banks, Bitcoin can help keep that in check, but also Bitcoin can be a partner in that. I don't think it has to be if this or, this or that. I think there is a world where they can live in equilibrium. Obviously, I prefer a Bitcoin only world, but I don't think that's possible. And I think that is where we're going to trigger a lot more regulation globally is that extreme. So it's a touchy kind of a balance, right? To keep it safe so it can still grow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is touchy. I'm kind of curious. I have just two more questions for you, but I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious how this Bitcoin future, because, in terms of how I see the US, I think it's in a fantastic position just because we have states' rights. And we really saw that because of COVID in 2020. What's the difference between the US and Canada, the US and the UK, the US and Australia, the US and Europe to most people? Well, before 2020, they would say, oh, maybe even the US is worse. But on the flip side, post COVID, you see that the U.S. actually has a structure to defend citizens from big government, and it works to some degree. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, and that personally made me bullish on the U.S. I'm kind of curious, you know, someone who's kind of in the Bitcoin U.S. political sphere, like how do you feel the U.S. is set up to, uh, you know, take advantage of Bitcoin structurally?
I think it's incredible, especially I agree. I think the states having the ability to have different value adds as well, right? Not every state's going to be a great state for mining, but it could be a great state for financial services, layer two startups, right? Or privacy or other things. And so people can vote by moving now or setting up businesses or entities in these states that support them. So I think COVID accelerated that because the work from home helped people think like, oh, I can move to Austin, or oh, I can move to Wyoming, I can move to Florida. It created a competition that I think will help the US maintain its competitive advantage overall. I love that so many miners are moving here. I mean, we're trying to get Bitcoin miners to move to Wyoming as well, and that's become a priority for the state's economic development center, the university, representatives in the state, and senators in the state. So, I mean, that's one example, right?
Yeah, I do think that's a great example. Like when you look at when you look at Bitcoin, like kind of adoption in America versus kind of across the globe, especially developing countries and nations, how do you kind of see it developing differently, I guess? And maybe a key
Yeah,
example is like El Salvador, right? They had this bill coming out, and we're seeing now other nations in Latin America, South America start to follow suit. Paraguay, Panama, Uruguay, all nations that have political will to adopt crypto and Bitcoin. Just kind of
yeah,
just compare and contrast, and maybe talk about the global more with Bitcoin.
yeah. So for us, right, we still have to wade through a lot of riffraff, and change in DC still comes slowly. Like I think it feels like it's very fast, but compared to other places, the check and balances actually keep it kind of slow moving. And so you have other states that are maybe, or countries that are smaller, or they have more, dramatic overthrows of the government or different things of that nature. I think it's a lot. The way I like to think of it, especially in Latin America, is they kind of leapfrogged telephone lines and went straight to cell phones in a lot of places. And I think the same will be true for using Bitcoin on in a daily, exchange. Or, for example, I have some friends from Argentina, and they're using it to store value because their currencies, inflated so much. So I think that those countries, like for example in South America or even Africa, right? There's such extreme inflation that they're going straight to the peer to peer. We're going through store of value a lot in the US, I believe, from what I'm experiencing. And I think they'll go straight to peer payments.
Yeah, I was talking to Lord Futsitua from Tonga, and he was saying like that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that in the West it could solve store of value, and also in third world countries it can solve store of value, but in nations with very poor financial infrastructure, it can solve P2P payments, and it can solve unit of account, and it can solve a lot of the things where there's just massive deficiencies in the payment infrastructure. I think a lot of people don't get that, cash serves a lot of the world, and where cash doesn't serve, they're really like grasping for straws for money and property. So, Bitcoin solves that in a major way, even if it is, on chain is slow, and Lightning is something that maybe is more for advanced users. We're improving there too.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the user experience has gotten so much better, and that's also got me really excited is the Lightning Network, what's being built on top of that, whether it's privacy tools or payment rails. I mean, it's really fascinating. And so that's what I believe we'll see is more adoption at the layer two level in these emerging economies. And I really do see it as kind of Bitcoin payments versus WeChat and Alipay payments. That's how I see it, especially with the international trade.
It's interesting that you bring up China just because, like, everyone I talk to on the macro side, I mean, not everyone, but the people I talk to in particular, are kind of bearish China. And I've
Yeah,
had a very bearish China stance, and their CBDC is never going to ship. They've never been able to, compel other nations with their authority. They barely even took Hong Kong back in the messiest way possible. So I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating them. I do. There is a little bit of conflict there between my kind of worldview versus yours. I'm curious,
yeah.
Amanda. Before we wrap this one up, do you want to respond to that or?
No, no, and I think that's the great part, right? Like I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me on a lot of these things, and I want to hear it. Like I think it's really good to hear different perspectives. too.
Yeah, but I don't want to, dwell on that too much. But I am kind of curious. Do you see yourself getting further involved in Bitcoin politics? Right, like it seems like right now, you're a stakeholder, but you're not necessarily like a part of it. So I'm kind of curious. Do you have aspirations beyond that,
You mean like politics is in running for something in the U.S.?
or getting heavily involved in the campaign, or I don't know. I'm just kind of
I
curious
don't
beyond
know.
just yeah. Do you have any political ambitions, especially in regards to advancing Bitcoin?
I mean, in advancing Bitcoin, I have a lot of ambitions, and I think if politics are in the way, there's um, that Hannibal quote, right? Like, I'll find a way or I will make one, because I do think politics can slow this down a little bit, and it might make it stronger. I mean, there's that perspective too, right? Sometimes in countries where it's banned or frowned upon, it becomes a lot stronger. So I don't have the magic answers. All I know is I believe from my experience teaching and being a resource for politicians has been helpful for the legislation that they've passed towards Bitcoin. And so to me, it's worth continuing to try until if we ever get to a point where it just doesn't make sense to try anymore.
Do you have a go-to piece of resource that you use when you're trying to teach someone about Bitcoin, or especially a staff or a politician?
Yeah, so usually it depends on where they are, right? So the Bitcoin standard, especially like off suggesting audiobook. The little Bitcoin book is nice and simple and short, and I think that has a great message as well. As far as content goes, obviously this publication and a few others. There's, there are a few people that you point to as well on Twitter, like especially Lynn Alden is someone that I always bring up. I think she's a genius at explaining the macro side of this, and that's how I understood it. So for me, she really resonates.
Awesome. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Need to get you on a lot more. Need to get you on Bitcoin Magazine a lot more. So really hope to see you around, and hope to continue to share a lot of your wisdom and knowledge and experience in the space. Before we leave, do you want to give the audience just a last word, and leave the Bitcoiners with one final thing from Amanda?
Yeah, I can, and hopefully you can hear the dog drinking his water in the background. He's been thirsty. So I think the main thing is, everyone's different. Not everyone's going to have the same approach, and that's the amazing thing about this community, right? I think it takes all kinds and all directions and all backgrounds. I do believe, where I can add value is probably more on the mining side, getting that to the US and Wyoming, hopefully, and on the politics side, kind of translating for politicians where Bitcoiners are, because it can be intimidating, right? Especially if you're a politician getting attacked by Bitcoin Twitter, or just afraid to even enter that realm. So, maybe more of like a translator. Maybe more translators are needed, and we need to hear those voices a little bit more, so that we can reach back and forth from Bitcoin to, different industries. It doesn't just have to be politics. It can be finance, it can be law, health, whatever it is, whatever makes sense at that time. And so I think that would be my message. It's not for everyone, but I think education is huge, and taking the time to teach people is invaluable, and that'll have a far reaching, you know, we can't even imagine how far that can reach. So keep doing that, keep educating, and keep being open to answering questions from people.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, Bitcoiners, you heard Amanda. Keep reaching out, keep educating, keep doing what you're doing. Honestly,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good things to say about the Bitcoiners out there, a lot of bad things to say about them. But I think the one thing that you can say is that I think Bitcoiners have been very, very effective, right? It's only
Yeah.
12 years into this revolution, and I think we've been moving at lightning speed. A lot of people, kind of be like, why aren't we at the moon yet? Why aren't we at
Yeah.
hyper Bitcoinization yet? But I do think that we're moving very, very quickly, and this community has, everything to thank for that, right? This has been bootstrapped from the grassroots, and all the people involved, everyone holding, everyone stacking, everyone chirping on Twitter is part of that. To all the Bitcoiners out there, thank you so much for what you do. Thank me for what I do by following me at ck_snarks. Go follow Bitcoin Magazine as well. Give us those 5-star reviews. Go follow Amanda. Amanda, where can people find you? I don't think I asked.
Yeah, it's Twitter. It's at Amanda and then _Cavaleri, Cavaleri. And you can find me in Wyoming too. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, go to Wyoming. Great state, great people. Big fan of Jackson Hole. I've been told that that's not even real Wyoming, so I need to branch out and go to other cities too there. But yeah, make sure to go follow Amanda. Thanks so much again, Amanda, and to all the Bitcoiners out there. Peace.
Thanks, BK.